I've lived in Michigan all of my life, with only a few brief spells when I lived like for 4 months in Georgia, and I lived for another couple months at Florida, Horseshoe Beach area. But Michigan has been my home most of my life, and I find it to be a land really of enchantment. Its Native American prehistory, its rich and colorful mythology, and that of the early settlers makes Michigan a very, very special place, and it is unique geographically. History lays on the ground here in Michigan, and prehistory especially. I remember one time, it's been years ago now, my ex-wife Kathy and I were at a site called Godum Gresham in Oscoda, and we were walking along looking at the sand, and there in the sand, in a semicircle, was the rim of a pot that dated back anywhere from 500 to 2,000 years ago, and it was just laying there in the sand, just ready to be picked up and examined and tell its story of a little bit of Michigan's past. But I want to talk to you about a legend which is from the historic period, and it's called the legend of the Nain Rouge. The Nain Rouge, you see, is French for red devil or red gnome, and it's a mythical creature that some believe originated in Normandy, France, as a type of lutin. Contrary viewpoints speculate that the alleged creature is more closely related to the Algonquin myths of the Glooscap, who, it is said, created a protective nature spirits and dwarves in the Midwest United States. Original legends tell of the creature being seen as a protector of Detroit, Michigan, but due to modern interpretations, is now feared by its residents as the harbinger of doom. His appearance is said to presage terrible events for the city. The Nain Rouge appears as a small child-like creature with red or black fur boots. He is also said to have blazing red eyes and rotten teeth. The creature is said to have attacked the first white settler of Detroit in 1701, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac, who soon after lost his fortune. And the creature is also said to have appeared on July 30th, 1763, before the Battle of Bloody Run, where 58 British soldiers were killed by Native Americans from Chief Pontiac's tribe. The small tributary of the Detroit River, which still flows through what is now Elmwood Cemetery, turned red with blood for days after the battle, and it is said he was seen dancing on the banks of the Detroit River. Multiple famous sightings occurred in the days before the 1805 fire, which destroyed most of Detroit. General William Hull reported a dwarf attack in the fog just before his surrender of Detroit in the War of 1812. Jane Dacey of East Elizabeth Street was at home performing errands one evening in October of 1872 when she entered a dark room and saw what the Detroit Free Press called a ghost. However, the description of blood-red eyes, long teeth, and rattling hoofs seem more akin to the famed Nain Rouge than a mere specter. The fright of seeing the creature caused Dacey to faint and become bedridden. Another woman claimed to have been attacked in 1884 and described the creature as resembling a baboon with a horned head, brilliant, restless eyes, and a devilish look on its face. And another report was attack was reported as recently as 1964. Other sightings include the day before the 12th Street riot in 1967 and before a huge snow ice storm of March 1976, when 2 utility workers are said to have seen what they thought was a child climbing a utility pole, which then jumped from the top of the pole and ran away as they approached. More recently, in the autumn of 1996, according to an article in the Michigan Believer, the Nain Rouge was spotted by 2 admittedly drunken nightclub patrons who claimed to both have heard a strange cawing sound, similar to that of a crow, coming from a small hunched-over man who was fleeing the scene of a car burglary. And the creature was described as wearing what looked like a really nasty torn fur coat. The Detroit Beer Company, a brew pub in downtown Detroit, has as its signature brew a Detroit Dwarf Lager named in honor of the Nain Rouge. And in 2010, a community-based movement began a tradition of a costumed community parade in Midtown Cass Corridor neighborhood called the March du Nain Rouge. The event is a revival of an early tradition in the legend of the Nain Rouge. At the conclusion of the parade, an effigy of the imp was destroyed, thus banishing the evil spirit from the city for yet another year. And each year, parade participants and spectators are encouraged to wear costumes so that when the Nain Rouge returns, he will not recognize the persons who once again ousted him from the city limits, and thus will not be able to seek any personal vengeance. The 2011 event featured a parade followed by the banishment and a party in Cass Park, drawing hundreds of guests. And at both the 2010 and 2011 events, an ad hoc organization calling itself the Friends of the Nain Rouge protested the banishment parade, arguing that the Nain Rouge is not to blame for the city's ills, and that, considering Detroit's population loss, no one should be banished from the city, particularly those who have been there the longest. The banishment parade has also taken place in 2012, 13, and 14, and the 2014 parade included a short speech by Alexis Wiley, Mayor Mike Dugan's representative. But yet there is more. I have another story here that I would like to share with you, again about the famous red dwarf. And it's one of Michigan's more... it's hard to pick a legend or a mythological Michigan story to be the weirdest. But the Nain Rouge, or the Red Dwarf of Detroit, is indeed right up there in the top 10, it would have to be. The infamous Red Dwarf of Detroit was reputed to be the foul offering of the stone god, who only appeared when there was to be trouble. The Red Dwarf was called the Demon of the Strait, and its appearance heralded disaster. Cadillac, founder of Detroit, encountered the Nain Rouge while sitting on the bank of the Detroit River. The Red Dwarf had jumped down right in front of the French colonial governor, startling him nearly out of his wits, and thrust a long stick at him as if it were a sword. Harried by the imp's wax, Cadillac drew his own sword and parried between the creature back with the flat of his blade until it ran away, crackling madly, and from that moment Cadillac's fortunes took a downturn, and he was eventually recalled to France, losing his trade monopoly and all of his privileges. The Red Dwarf was next seen during Pontiac's Rebellion, a period in which the Native American tribes had banded together against the British following the French and Indian War. The United Tribes had attacked a number of settlements and laid siege to Fort Detroit. The British had attempted to end the siege with the sneak attack on Pontiac's encampment, but their plan was betrayed to the rebel leader. Pontiac defeated the British in the Battle of Blood Run, which took place at the creek 2 miles north of the fort. Several survivors of the battle claimed to have seen the Red Dwarf running along the shores of the lake shortly before the battle began. And the imp was spotted once again in 1805, racing through the streets of Detroit just before the city burned to the ground. And during the War of 1812, when the forces of the British General Brock began bombarding the American forces within Fort Detroit, General Hull acceded to a demand for unconditional surrender after he saw the Red Dwarf leering at him through the fog. And to this day, the creature continues to be the herald of misfortune for Detroit. The Red Dwarf dashed down 12th Street doing backflips and cartwheels on the night of the police raid that sparked the race riots of 1967, and it was observed by Detroit Edison linemen taking a lunch break in 1976. The Nain Rouge climbed up the utility pole right in front of their eyes, and when they yelled at it, believing it was a child at first, the Red Dwarf dropped to the ground, leered at them rudely, and scampered away. And the next day, an ice storm left 400,000 Detroit residents without electricity. Any truth to it? Well, every legend, I believe, and a mythological story has some element of truth buried in it. And I believe that the Nain Rouge indeed has some truth behind it, and rather than stating that it was a creature of French origin, I would believe that it was a creature of Native American origin, because the Native Americans had many spirits that protected their land here in Michigan for a while before the white man finally robbed it from them. So I hope that you've enjoyed this little venture into the strange side of Michigan, and thank you for taking the time to listen.